Have you ever heard of a man who inspired some of the most terrifying psychopaths in cinema? Imagine living cut off from the world, obsessed with death and human skin. A man whose name became synonymous with horror. But the truth behind Ed Gein is even more disturbing than any horror movie. He wasn't just a murderer. He created something with his victims, something that no one should ever have seen. And the scariest part? Even today, there are secrets about this case that remain unexplained. Get ready, because what you're about to discover may forever change the way you view terror. From a young age, Ed Gein already showed signs of a tormented mind. Raised on an isolated farm in rural Wisconsin, he grew up far from society, surrounded only by his family. His father, a failed alcoholic, was a largely absent figure. But his mother, Augusta Gein, dominated his life in a frightening way. Augusta was extremely religious and saw the world as a filthy, sinful place. She raised Ed and his older brother Henry under a strict doctrine, teaching them that all women were depraved, except for her. Ed wasn't allowed to interact with anyone outside the home and grew up believing that his mother was the only person worthy of trust. While other kids played and socialized, Ed spent his days isolated, immersed in religious books and macabre tales. Fascinated by anatomy and death, he obsessively studied dissection manuals and ancient rituals. His obsession with death and the human body started early, though no one could have imagined where it would eventually lead him. When his father died, nothing changed. But when Henry, his brother, began to question Augusta's beliefs and tried to break free from his mother's influence, something strange happened. A fire struck the farm and, shortly after, Henry was found dead. The official cause was a heart attack, but something was off. His body showed no signs of burns and his skull had a suspicious wound. Even with that mysterious death, Ed's life continued as before. But when Augusta passed away, everything changed. Without his mother, Ed completely lost any connection to reality. His world crumbled. Now, he was alone, with no one to guide him, and that's when his true nature began to emerge. The strangest part, Augusta's death wasn't the end of her influence over Ed. On the contrary, it was the beginning of something far darker. After his mother's death, Ed Gein plunged into a dark and disturbing world. He began roaming local cemeteries, exhuming bodies of women who resembled Augusta. But for Ed, that wasn't enough. He wanted more. In 1954, Mary Hogan, the owner of a small bar, disappeared without a trace. What no one knew was that her body was in Ed's house, where he performed unspeakable acts. 3 years later, another woman vanished. Bernice Worden, the owner of a hardware store. The last sale recorded at her store was to a mysterious customer who purchased a gallon of antifreeze. This detail eventually led the police to Ed. What the investigators found upon entering his house was something that no one could have ever imagined. The place was a true horror show. Human bones fashioned into household utensils, skulls used as bowls, masks made of human skin, and furniture covered with leather taken from his victims. But the most bizarre discovery was yet to come. In the middle of the room, the police found a macabre piece, a vest made entirely of human skin, stitched together to resemble a woman's body. Ed had created a second skin, a grotesque attempt to bring his mother back. During interrogations, Ed confessed that he had not only killed Mary and Bernice, but had also desecrated dozens of graves in search of human parts for his sick rituals. He described his acts without any hint of remorse, as if he were merely recounting an everyday routine. And the most chilling part, experts believe that Ed may have done far more than he admitted. But have all the secrets of his macabre house truly been unveiled? Ed Gein's mind was a veritable labyrinth of obsessions and distortions. After his arrest, mental health specialists pored over his case, trying to understand what drove him to commit such gruesome acts. The diagnosis? Schizophrenia and severe psychotic disorders. But mental illness alone did not explain everything. From childhood, Ed developed an obsession with corpses, fueled by isolation and his mother's controlling influence. He not only stole bodies, but saw in them a way to keep Augusta alive, to recreate her presence in a grotesque manner. The most disturbing detail? Ed didn't seem to view his acts as wrong. He spoke about his crimes with an unsettling coldness, as if he were describing a strange hobby rather than a parade of horrors. He believed that the bodies were merely raw material for his experiments, not real victims. The idea of creating a second skin from human remains revealed a deeper desire. He wanted to become his own mother. Inspired by stories about identity change and transformation, Ed began stitching together pieces of skin in a sick attempt to be reborn as Augusta. During psychiatric evaluations, it became clear that his relationship with his mother was the central factor in his psychopathy. The emotional dependency, combined with fear and veneration, created an explosive mix. Even after her death, Augusta continued to control Ed, now in a far more sinister way. But was Ed Gein just an isolated case? Or did his deranged mind inspire other killers over the years? What happened to him after his arrest? The answer might be even more disturbing than his crimes. Ed Gein's crimes not only shocked the world, but also became a source of inspiration for some of the most terrifying characters in fiction. His name echoed throughout pop culture, shaping the way terror and psychological horror were portrayed in film and literature. Norman Bates, from Psycho, was directly inspired by Gein's story. Just like Ed, Norman had an obsessive relationship with his deceased mother, even to the point of taking on her identity. The idea of a killer torn between his own personality and maternal influence was a direct reflection of what happened in real life. Perhaps the most iconic reference is Leatherface, from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The use of masks made from human skin, the social isolation, and the character's extreme morbidity were all inspired by Ed Gein's disturbing acts. Although the film amplified the brutality, the central elements were taken straight from the real-life killer's macabre home. Another sinister character bearing traces of Gein is Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. His obsession with human skin and the idea of creating a new identity stitched together from his victims' remains bear a chilling resemblance to Ed's experiments. The concept of someone trying to rebirth themselves through the skin of others came directly from the accounts of Gein's deeds. Beyond films, his story influenced countless books, TV series, and even music. The psychological terror explored by writers and screenwriters found in Ed Gein a real-life example of how fear can transcend fiction. And the most unsettling part? Even after his death, Gein's legacy lives on, influencing new generations of horror creators. But have movies and books captured the whole truth? Or are there still secrets about this case that have never been revealed? When the truth about Ed Gein came to light, the small town of Plainfield was plunged into a state of shock and horror. Gein's trial quickly became one of the most talked about cases of the time. But contrary to what many expected, he wasn't tried as an ordinary murderer. Due to his disturbed mental state, Ed was deemed unfit to stand trial and, instead of receiving the death penalty, was sent to a maximum security psychiatric hospital. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, reinforcing the claim that he didn't fully comprehend the gravity of his actions. During his years of confinement, Gein remained silent about many details of his crimes. Doctors noted that he behaved in a polite and even friendly manner, completely contrasting with the monstrosity he had committed. Yet there was something unsettling about his demeanor. He never showed any remorse. Ed Gein spent the rest of his life at the Central State Hospital in Wisconsin. To many, he seemed like just a fragile old man, devoid of any aggression. But within that mind, the ghosts of his past were very much alive. He would spend hours drawing and writing, yet he never spoke about the atrocities that had marked his name in history. On July 26, 1984, Ed Gein died of respiratory failure caused by cancer. He was buried in the same cemetery from which he had exhumed bodies for his macabre experiments. Over time, his grave was vandalized several times, and even his original headstone was stolen, only to be found years later in another state. But did Gein's death put an end to all the mysteries surrounding him? Or are there still secrets hidden in the shadows of his story? Ed Gein's story continues to haunt the popular imagination. Decades after his death, his name still resonates among the most disturbing cases in criminal history. But do we really know the whole truth? His crimes were officially documented, his macabre objects seized, and his mind studied by experts. Yet, some questions remain unanswered. How many victims did he really have? Were there other secrets hidden on that isolated farm? And perhaps the most unsettling of all, what would have happened if the police had never discovered his crimes? Could he have gone even further? Now, I want to hear your opinion. Was Ed Gein a lone monster, or just one of the many faces of evil that might still be out there? Leave your comments below and let me know what you think. And if you love dark stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. There's always a new mystery waiting for you.